The morning the world changed was like any other. At least, that's what Dr. Elise Varon told herself as she stirred her coffee, staring blankly through her apartment window at a slate-gray sky. It was 5:42 a.m., and the city of Toronto was just beginning to stir, the streets damp from a light rain, the hum of early commuters just reaching the 15th floor. Elise, a cognitive linguist and professor, hadn't slept. She hadn't truly rested in weeks. 3 days ago, people across the globe began waking up with vivid, haunting visions. Not dreams. Visions. They were shared experiences, uncanny in their consistency. In the first reports, a man in Berlin described standing in a desert of fractured glass beneath a sky of spiraling moons. A child in Senegal recounted the same landscape, down to where the moons moved, slow, like breathing. A woman in Mumbai had drawn it exactly. The arches, the shattered horizon, the singing. Elise hadn't believed it at first. She dismissed it as collective suggestion, a social media phenomenon spiraling out of control. But then it happened to her. She stood barefoot on the glass sands, no sensation pain, only weightlessness. The sky pulsed overhead, and though no voice spoke, she felt a presence, immense, tender, watching. It pressed into her mind not with words, but with impressions. Recognition, mourning, a question she could not quite grasp. When she awoke, her pillow was soaked with tears. She had not cried in over a year. Now, the world scrambled for answers. Neuroscientists, spiritual leaders, quantum physicists, they convened in emergency conferences and live streams, united by the growing certainty that this was not a hallucination. These experiences were consistent, replicable, and, perhaps most unsettling, intelligent. The media called it the first silence, named after the single unifying detail. In every vision, there was no sound. Even when the winds blew or the sky shifted, silence ruled. Only the feeling remained. Elise was summoned to the Genesis Institute, a privately funded research facility outside Ottawa. She had worked with them before, mostly on machine translation interfaces and neurosemantics. This time, the summons was more direct. "You had the dream," the voice on the phone had said. She hadn't asked how they knew. When she arrived at Genesis, she was greeted by a lean, serious-faced man with a shaved head and gray eyes. "Dr. Varon," he said, "I'm Lieutenant Akari. You don't look military." "I'm not anymore," he replied. "Come with me." The facility had changed since her last visit. There was less bureaucracy, more guards. They moved past biometric doors into a low-lit chamber lined with monitors, showing neural scans and shifting data strings. At the center sat a girl, no older than 12, wearing a hospital gown and a 1,000-yard stare. "She's one of the few who didn't just dream it," Akari said quietly. "She's still in it." Elise blinked. "What do you mean in it?" "She hasn't spoken, barely eats, but when she sleeps, the readings spike. Same patterns as the rest of the world, only sustained, continuous, as if the signal never stops." "Signal?" Elise asked, turning. "We believe it's a transmission, not electromagnetic. Something else, a resonance, non-local." Her mind reeled. Quantum entanglement? Possibly, or consciousness tethering. Elise approached the girl. Her skin was pale, her breathing slow. Around her, the monitors displayed shifting fractal patterns, familiar to Elise now. The same patterns she'd seen behind her closed eyelids at night. "What's her name?" "Dara," Akari replied. "She drew this." He handed Elise a piece of paper. It showed the glass desert, the moons, and something else. A figure. It was tall, luminous, with elongated limbs and no face, just a void of shimmering light. Its hand reached outward, palm up toward the viewer. Elise touched the drawing. That was there. In mine. She was the first to see it. Now, more are reporting the same figure. We think it's the contact point. Elise took a breath, absorbing the weight of the implication. Not metaphor, not mass hysteria. Contact. They had been reached, but not by a ship or probe. By a thought. Later, in her assigned lab quarters, Elise reviewed the scans from thousands of dreamers. The patterns were too precise to be coincidence. They resembled linguistic constructs, but not any human language. No syntax, no grammar, just pure semiotic expression. She remembered her own dream again. The entity had not spoken, but somehow it had communicated. She felt understood, even loved, and beneath that, a sorrow so immense it cracked through her like thunder. She picked up her pen and began to draw. Not words, but spirals, curves, fractals, layering symbols over symbols. Akari entered, watching silently. "You're one of them," he said. She looked up. "One of what?" "Receivers. The ones who felt more. We've tracked about 600 cases worldwide. You're not just dreaming. You're being seeded." The word unsettled her. "Seeded for what?" He hesitated. "We don't know, but we believe it's a kind of test." Elise stood. "You think they're trying to see if we can understand them?" "Yes, and maybe whether we're ready." She didn't ask what they were ready for. She already felt the answer building in the silence. That night, she lay awake in her bunk, unwilling to sleep. But sleep came, and with it, the desert. Only this time, it was different. The sky above the spiraling moons cracked open, revealing a vast eye of liquid light, and beneath it, the figure stepped forward, closer than before. It reached toward her, but this time it spoke. The voice was not sound, but it filled her being, resonant with meaning. It asked a question she barely understood, and yet it demanded an answer. She woke with a scream caught in her throat, eyes wet, hands trembling. She wrote down the shapes it showed her. There were no words, just symbols, and one unmistakable emotion. Time is ending. Choose. In the hallway outside, alarms began to ring. Across the globe, all dreamers, every single one, had awakened simultaneously, and each had drawn the same final symbol. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Something was coming. Elise stared at the symbol. It pulsed gently on the tablet screen like a living thing. For interlocking arcs forming a shape that didn't belong to any human language, yet hinted at something deeply familiar. She'd seen it drawn by hundreds now, all sketching the same design with identical curvature and spatial logic. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a map. And yet it meant something. Every part of her insisted on it. Across the room, Lieutenant Akari stood by the observation glass, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had barely spoken since the global awakening, but his tension filled the space like static electricity. Beyond the glass, in the adjacent chamber, Dara still sat silently in her chair. But now, her eyes followed the room, tracking movement. She was waking up, but into what? She's responding more to the symbol than to us. Akari finally said, voice low. She recognizes it. Elise replied, they all do. Any progress on translation? Elise exhaled. That's the problem. There's no language as we understand it. No syntax, no morphology. It's relational, a gestalt of thought and emotion. The symbol isn't saying something. It's being something. Akari turned to her. That's not helpful. It's the truth. He looked away again, jaw flexing. His impatience wasn't personal. It was existential. Since the synchronized awakening, governments had moved to DEFCON levels of readiness. Satellites were reoriented. Radar swept the skies obsessively. But nothing physical had come. No ships. No probes. Just silence and dreams. And the symbol. Elise had started calling it the sigil, half mocking her own growing certainty that it wasn't just communication. It was a key, a cipher, a lock. She tapped her screen again and pulled up the neural overlays. There was a pattern to how different brains reacted to the symbol, and how those reactions intensified if exposed to specific environmental triggers, sound frequencies, light pulses, or even music. Music, especially. She hesitated, then opened a file labeled Dara Day 4. It was a recording of a humming sound, soft and dissonant, like wind through metal. Dara had hummed it once while asleep. It shouldn't have meant anything. And yet, when played in proximity to other receivers, it triggered heightened neural resonance. She played it now quietly. Dara's eyes shifted toward the speaker. She heard that, Akari said. Elise nodded. I think it's how they layer meaning. Not just symbol, but sensation, emotion, memory. They're not giving us a language to translate. They're merging with our sense-making. Akari walked toward her, his usual stoicism splintering. You said earlier this was a test. What if it's more than that? What if it's an invitation? Or a warning? He glanced toward the girl. Or both. Later that night, Elise sat alone in her temporary quarters, her mind heavy with impossible questions. Her research had always chased a dream of universal language. Now it had found her, and it was alien, not in form, but in intent. The dreams had resumed worldwide. But now, instead of the silent desert, people reported being shown scenes of their own memories, loved ones' grief, moments of shame or guilt, always accompanied by the sigil, always ending with the same sensation, anticipation and a kind of mournful expectation. She checked the shared database. Over 2 million people now reported dream interactions with the entity. It had a presence, consistent, distinct, and singular. It remembered them. The dreams weren't simulations. They were conversations. The door buzzed. She opened it to find a young man, mid-20s, gaunt, sharp-eyed. He wore a Genesis badge. "Dr. Veron?" he asked. "Yes." "My name's Julian. I'm one of them, a receiver. They said you want to talk to me." She gestured him in, and he sat, eyes darting around like he expected the walls to speak. "You've seen the figure?" she asked. "Yes, more than once. But that's not why I'm here." He reached into his coat and pulled out a notebook. Inside were pages of symbols, not just a sigil, but variations, patterns, combinations. They rippled with coherence. "You wrote this?" "I didn't write it," he said carefully. "It came through me." Elise flipped through the pages, the hair on her arms rising. The formations echoed something deep, mathematical, emotional, not random. "They're trying to teach us," Julian whispered. "They don't use words because words separate. They use resonance, connection, shared cognition." He looked up at her, eyes dark. "They're preparing us to join them." Her pulse quickened. "Join them how?" He swallowed. "I don't think it's physical. It's identity. Their collective awareness. They fuse. And the ones who can't accept that, who cling to individuality, can't follow." Elise thought of Dara, of the way she stared now as if only half in this world. Julian leaned forward, his voice almost reverent. "There's a second symbol. One they haven't shown everyone. I saw it once, after I let go." "Let go of what?" "Fear." He sketched it. It was a spiral, but inward, narrowing, resembling an eye or vortex. She felt a chill touch her spine. "What does it mean?" Julian stood. "Departure." After he left, Elise sat in the dark, turned the page slowly in her hand. The new symbol didn't pulse like the sigil. It drew in like gravity, like a question you didn't want to answer. Outside, the wind howled against the windows. The following morning, the reports surged again. Several receivers had fallen into sudden catatonic states. Monitors showed heightened neural activity, but no trauma. Their minds weren't shutting down. They were leaving. Akari found Elise in the lab, his face pale. 3 in Canada, 2 in Japan, 1 in Nigeria. All connected to the second symbol. No physical cause of collapse. "They're not dying," Elise murmured. "No, they're transitioning." He didn't reply. She looked toward Dara's room. The girl was now drawing constantly, pages and pages of symbols and scenes. One in particular kept repeating. A crowd of people standing at the edge of a shimmering rift, the sky breaking open above them. They didn't look afraid. Akari joined her at the glass. "Do you think it's coming soon?" he asked. "I don't think it is coming," Elise said quietly. "I think we're being asked to go." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dara looked up at them for the first time and smiled. The city streets no longer sounded the same. In the week since the first collective awakening, something had settled over the world. A hush, not born of fear, but of waiting. People moved more slowly, spoke in softer voices, and looked at each other just a beat longer, as if trying to see past the eyes into the thoughts beneath. The global noise had quieted, but something louder had taken its place. Inside, Elise stood at the Genesis Institute South Tower, watching the horizon shimmer with morning haze. The world hadn't ended. It had simply paused. Across countries, economies had slowed, militaries had stood down, and conflicting governments had agreed on something unprecedented: a unified council for extraterrestrial contact. It wasn't optimism that fueled the agreement. It was the overwhelming pressure of the unknown. No one wanted to be the first to provoke or misstep. But while politicians debated frameworks and treaties, the dreamers kept dreaming, and more people were joining them daily. Nearly 12 million now reported sustained interaction. And with each new participant, the signal grew stronger, denser with intent, more refined. Something was building. Elise felt it in her bones. Dara had begun to speak, not in full sentences, but in fragments, soundless whispers that Elise had to lean in to catch. Her voice, when it came, carried a resonance that didn't seem entirely her own. The child who once stared blankly now moved with eerie precision, her drawings forming sequences that bore mathematical logic, emotional valence, and a direction. "They're not just speaking to us," Dara said once, eyes unfocused. "They're leading us." Elise had felt it too, in dreams that were now waking. Scenes from her childhood, moments she thought she'd buried. Each accompanied by the sigil, each overlaid with impossible clarity. The entity, when it appeared, no longer stood distant. It now walked beside her, silent but present, reflecting everything she carried inside. Akari was less convinced. He had begun working in shifts, sleeping little, always scanning new reports from Allied military satellites. Despite the quiet, he remained alert to threats, biological, psychological, ideological. "They could be pacifying us," he said during one tense conversation, "lowering defenses through emotional manipulation, making us compliant." Elise didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. The possibility was there, and the entity had offered no guarantees, no proof of benevolence. Just the sigil. Just dreams. "Is fear the only lens we have left?" she asked him gently. He looked at her, tired but clear-eyed. "Fear keeps us alive." "Sometimes," she replied, "but it also keeps us from becoming something more." The divide between them wasn't distrust. It was the essence of a larger conflict now unfolding across the world. What if the greatest threat was not destruction, but transformation? What if the choice wasn't about survival, but surrender? Julian had returned, his sketches now spanning notebooks, walls, even floor tiles. He didn't sleep much anymore. When Elise asked how he felt, he said, "Lighter, like I'm already on the other side." He'd begun to attract others, receivers who resonated more deeply with the entity, who shared dreams and patterns. They called themselves the Threshold Collective. Not a cult, not quite a movement, but something between belief and becoming. Akari kept a wary eye on them. "They're pulling away from the rest of us," he said, "creating their own reality." "They might not have a choice," Elise said. "They're being changed, or recruited." That evening, a power fluctuation surged through the Genesis complex, knocking out 3 data vaults and temporarily disrupting neural monitors. In the aftermath, a dozen receivers collapsed into near catatonic states. When they awoke, each had drawn a new symbol. Elise recognized the shape. Not the sigil, not the spiral of departure. This one was a branching lattice, like a neural web, but fractal, recursive. "They're building something," she said aloud. Julian confirmed it. "A bridge. Not physical. Cognitive. It's not about them coming to us. It's about us reaching to them." Akari stared at the image. "What's on the other side?" Julian only smiled. "Not something else. Something more." The Genesis leadership demanded action. The World Contact Council issued a directive. Containment protocols, deeper study, potential isolation of threshold members. Fear had crept back into the halls of power, cloaked in reason. Elise argued against it. "You can't imprison transformation," she said. "You can only delay it." But containment began. Receivers deemed unstable were removed from public access. Online communities were monitored. Collective dream reports were suppressed. Then came the silence. For exactly 3 hours and 14 minutes, all contact ceased. Dreams stopped. Symbols faded. Receivers felt nothing. Panic swept the collective. Some collapsed in grief, others in rage. Julian withdrew entirely, his eyes wide with loss. It was like being cut off from your own soul, he said. When contact returned, it was different, less intimate. The entity felt distant again. The dreamscapes reverted the original desert. Glass sands, breathless moons. No figures, no voices, just a sigil, slowly eroding into dust. Dara stopped speaking. The message was clear. We are not ready. The days that followed were marked by uncertainty and dread. The collective fractured. Some believed the entity had given up. Others claimed it was testing final resolve. Governments declared an emergency summit. And then the rift appeared. Not in the sky, not in orbit, but within the minds of 23 receivers simultaneously. They described it in identical terms. A tear in perception, shimmering with infinite reflections. On the other side, not aliens, not beings. A shared space, fluid, luminous, full of possibility. An invitation made of memory and resonance. Julian came to Elise that night. His voice trembled, but his eyes held peace. They're not taking us, he said. We've always belonged to them. We just forgot how to remember. You're leaving. I think we all will, eventually, but some sooner than others. He handed her a final sketch. It showed two figures standing on opposite cliffs, reaching across the void. Between them floated the sigil, no longer separate, but merging. What is this? She whispered. The moment before unity. She stared at him, wanting to stop him, to understand more. But there were no more questions. Just a slow, growing certainty that nothing would ever return to what it was. At midnight, Julian closed his eyes and stepped inward. He did not wake. Elise sat beside Dar's bed as dawn broke. The girl stirred, her voice a whisper. They're waiting. Elise didn't ask who. She already knew. The storm came without warning. Not a weather system. Not one that satellites could detect, but a storm in consciousness. A wave of overwhelming sensation that hit receivers like a psychic tide. Around the world, hundreds collapsed simultaneously, eyes rolling back, voices muttering incomprehensible phrases, as if tuning into an ancient, foreign signal. Elise felt it too. Not the collapse, but the pressure, the hum, the internal pulling as if her very self were being stretched toward a center she couldn't see. Dara screamed once and then fell into silence. Akari was already in the lab when Elise arrived. He stood over Dara's motionless body, his eyes flicking between monitors and her still chest. She's alive, he said quickly. Vitals normal, but neural activity is off the scale. She's not asleep. She's elsewhere. Elise nodded, trying to control the tremor in her hands. The sigil had returned to the screen above Dara's bed, but it was different now, changing in real time, cycling through forms like an evolving equation. The sequence seemed to tell a story, one of growth, rupture, and recombination. The rift opened again, Akari said. We picked it up in 27 simultaneous dream reports. This time, the receivers stepped through, but not physically. No, but when they woke up, they weren't the same. They knew things. One of them recited quantum structures we haven't even theorized. Another spoke fluent Sanskrit despite never learning it. Cognitive convergence, Elise whispered. They're uploading knowledge into us. Or rather, unlocking what was already there. She looked at Dara's still form. She's on the bridge now. Akari's voice dropped. We're losing them, Elise. No, she said. We're finding them. Later, she sat alone in the observation chamber, watching old footage of Julian. His final moments had been still, serene even, but now they carried a different weight. She watched the slow blink of his eyes, the way his breath faded into quiet. He wasn't dying. He was leaving. And what terrified her most was a growing sense that he hadn't gone anywhere. He had simply stepped beyond perceptual boundary, slipping into a larger field of consciousness she could almost, but not quite feel. The collective had gone underground after the silence. Many feared government retaliation. Others feared cognitive collapse. But now, they were re-emerging calmer, more focused. They met in quiet places, spoke with a new cadence, and carried with them a certainty that the transition was inevitable. We are not adapting to contact. One said in a recorded message, "We are becoming contact." The entity had not shown itself again. No figures in dreams. No voices in the sand. Only the evolving sigil and the sense of presence, of being observed not with scrutiny, but with deep, aching familiarity, as if it had always known us. Elise dreamed again. This time she stood not in a desert, but a boundless sea, its surface reflecting not stars, but moments from her own life. Her mother's hands, the dusty windows of her childhood home. The first time she failed. The first time she forgave herself. And floating above the water was a sigil, glowing, changing, and in its center, a doorway of light. She stepped toward it, and awoke with a gasp. Akari was waiting. Dara spoke again. Elise followed him to the chamber. Dara sat up, awake, but not entirely present. She looked older somehow, her face bearing an expression Elise had only ever seen in the very old or the deeply enlightened. A calm beyond understanding. "They say it's time," Dara whispered. "For what?" Dara tilted her head. "For you to choose." The choice had always been implied. Accept the transformation or resist it. But now it had arrived. The entity would not force. It would offer. The bridge was open, but crossing it required consent at the deepest level. Not verbal, not conscious. Soul-level consent. "I don't understand what's on the other side," Elise said gently. "You do," Dara said. "You've always known. You've just been afraid to name it." That night, Elise found herself unable to sleep. She walked the halls of Genesis, pausing in front of the main archive where thousands of hours of receiver data were stored. She thought of every conversation, every sketch, every whispered word that had passed through this place. Each one was a thread in a tapestry that had begun long before humanity ever thought to look up. Akari found her there. "You're going," he said simply. "I don't know what that means." "You do." He didn't stop her, just stood quietly, as if watching someone board a ship. "You were right to be afraid," she told him. "But fear doesn't mean retreat. Sometimes it means the path ahead is real." She returned to the observation chamber. Dara stood waiting. "Close your eyes," the girl said. And Elise did. She found herself on the edge of the sea again, the sigil pulsing before her. But this time, it wasn't just memory reflected in the water. It was others. Every receiver, every dreamer, standing in their own space but facing the same light. They reached forward as one. Elise stepped through. She did not vanish. She expanded. Awareness bloomed outward like 1,000 suns igniting. She could feel the thoughts of others, not as noise, but as harmony. The entity wasn't a being. It was a we. A civilization not of bodies, but of minds joined in purpose and empathy. It had never been apart from humanity. It had simply waited until we were quiet enough to hear. She saw Earth then, not from above, but from within, each life a note in a planetary symphony. And she understood the first contact had never been external. It had always been an awakening. We weren't meeting aliens. We were meeting ourselves, unfiltered, unfractured, whole. She returned hours later, her body unchanged, but her gaze profoundly different. Akari stood waiting. "What did you see?" he asked. "Everything," she said. He looked away, not in fear, but in mourning. "Then I've already lost you." "No," she said, stepping forward. "You never lose what becomes part of you." She reached for his hand, and for the first time, Akari let go of the edge and reached back,